Okay. Hello, everyone. It's Tom Congdon. I just want to make sure before I get started, sound check. Everybody hear me okay?
Sound great.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening to everyone. I'm Tom Congdon. I'm the Executive Deputy at the Department of Public Service, and I'd like to call to order the joint meeting of the New York State Indian Point Closure Task Force and the Indian Point Decommissioning Oversight Board. As you all know, the task force has been meeting since 2017 to help the communities around Indian Point transition following the plant's closure. I was designated chair of the task force by former PSC chair John Rhodes. Earlier this year, the Decommissioning Oversight Board was established by the Department of Public Service at the direction of Governor Cuomo and with the strong support of Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Galiff and many other community leaders. The creation of this important body was very timely. As Indian Point ceased operations only a few weeks ago, the PSC completed its review and approval of the sale of the plant from Entergy to Holtec at the end of May, and as the preparations for decommissioning get underway. I'll pause here just for a moment because I am getting a little feedback, so if you could please go on mute if you're not speaking, I'd appreciate it. Our current PSC chair, John Howard, has designated me as chair of the Decommissioning Oversight Board, and today is the first meeting. Next slide, please. Before I get to the introductions, I'd like to note the arrangement for today's virtual meeting. All attendee lines are muted upon entry. For panelists, during the presentation, you can unmute yourself if you have questions and want to speak up. We will be having a public statement session at the end of this meeting. Participants who pre-registered to speak will be given first priority, and other statements will be accepted as time allows. The chat feature is also enabled, and we will be reviewing the chats as we are able to do so during the meeting, but we guarantee that we will review all the chats following the meeting. And if there are any technical difficulties along the way, you can dial 1-800-342-3330. Next slide. We have a very full agenda and a very large group on these two important bodies. I'd like to be sure that we get through the introductions quickly so that we have time after the full agenda to get to the public statement portion of the agenda. So as we start the introductions, I'd like everyone to please simply state their name and affiliation. And for efficiency's sake, I'll do a roll call to ask for you to speak up in the following order. So I'll start with the governor's office.
Hi there, this is Rajiv Shah, Assistant Counsel to the Governor for Energy, Environment, and Agriculture.
Thank you, Raj. From the State Senate. Senator Harcum. You may be on mute. I'll come back around. From the State Assembly.
Sandy Galiff, New York State Assemblywoman, 95th Assembly District, where the plants were operational. Thanks.
Great. From the County Executive's Office.
Susan Spear on behalf of Westchester County Executive George Latimer.
From the Town of Cortland. Were we joined yet by Supervisor Puglisi? The Village of Buchanan.
Teresa Knickerbocker, Village of Buchanan Mayor and host community to the Indian Point Energy Center, and currently Holtec.
Thank you. Hendrick Hudson School District.
Good evening, Joseph Hochreiter, Superintendent of the Hendrick Hudson School District.
From the County Legislature.
Colin Smith, County Legislator for District 1, where the plant currently is.
Thank you. And I did get a note while we were talking from Legislator Borgia, who continues to have technical difficulties. I've sent her the tech support, so hopefully she'll be able to join later.
Yes, she's. Oh, I'm sorry.
She's.
I was just going to say, yeah, she just texted me as well. She's trying to get on, so she sends her apologies in the meantime.
Okay. Very good. Now to our labor representatives from the Teamsters.
Al, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Al.
How you doing, Tom? Al Libitor from Teamsters. I'm the business agent for Indian Point, but as you know, I'm filling in for Lupa County tonight.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I see Pete Harcum, Senator Harcum. Are you able to get sound?
I should be. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Terrific.
Welcome. Back to the labor representatives from the UWUA.
Yeah, how you doing, Tom? William Smith, Vice President, Utility Workers, Local 1-2.
Thank you, Bill. And do we have Tom from the Westchester Putnam Central Labor Council? Tom Carey?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hi, Tom.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thomas Carey. I'm the president of the Westchester Putnam Central Labor Body. I'm also a business representative for the Plumbers and Steam Fitters Local 21 in the Westchester Putnam jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm going to move now to the state agencies. I'll start with my boss, the PSC chair, John Howard. John, are you on?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I'm here. Do I get to have a few minutes, Tom, or am I have to wait?
If we could go through the introductions, Chair, and then during the presentations, there will be opportunity.
I'm John Howard, Chair of the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, John. Members of the DPS team.
Hi, good evening. John Sipos, Deputy General Counsel.
Hi, Cindy McCarran, Deputy Director for Safety and Reliability.
Hi, Cindy. Any other DPS folks?
Yes, Kevin Spicer. I'm the Chief of Pipeline Safety and Reliability.
Thank you. And we know. Oh, hi, Arpit. Go ahead.
Arpit Mehta, Pipeline Safety Section, DPS.
Anyone else from DPS?
Joseph White here from DPS, just here for support. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Tom Kesmerick here from DPS.
Great. DEC.
Good evening, Kelly Turturro, Regional Director for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation.
Thank you. Department of Labor.
Karen Coleman, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Administration and Chief Financial Officer.
Orville Abrahams, Deputy Commissioner for the Division of Employment and Workforce Solutions at the Department of Labor.
Thank you, Orville. Department of State.
Patterson, representing Secretary of State Rosanna Zarato and the Department of State.
Division of Homeland Security.
Good evening, Jennifer Waka with the State Office of Emergency Management within the Division of Homeland Security, Deputy Director.
Thank you. Thank you. And after you've introduced yourself, if everyone can remember to go back on mute, it will help ensure there's no feedback for the listeners. Division of Homeland Security, we got, thank you. Empire State Development.
Vincent Ravishir, Senior VP for Energy.
Thank you. Anyone else from ESD? New York Power Authority?
Good evening, Wendy Colon, Vice President of Shared Services of the agency.
Thank you, Ruth. And NYSERDA?
Hello, everyone. Elise Peterson, Senior Advisor for Nuclear Coordination and Radioactive Waste Policy, and also State Liaison Officer Designee to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Excellent, thank you. For those of you who may be new to WebEx, you will see your name on a panel to the right of your screen. And to the right of your name, you'll see a microphone. If you bring your mouse over your name, hover your mouse over your name, you'll see a microphone that will go green when you're unmuted, and you can click yourself. Did I miss anyone from the task force before introducing some new members from the Decommissioning Oversight Board?
Hi, Tom. It's Scott Palladino, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Taxation and Finance.
Thank you, Scott.
Skip right over me.
Okay, so everyone who just introduced themselves, also, I'm grateful that you all agreed to also be appointed to the Decommissioning Oversight Board. And per the governor's direction, we've also added to the Decommissioning Oversight Board a representative from the environmental community, Richard Webster from Riverkeeper, and a technical expert, Dave Lockbaum, who is formerly of the Union of Concerned Scientists and is retired. And I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves and perhaps, because you're new to the group, say a few words about your background. Starting with Richard, please.
Hi, I'm Richard Webster. I'm the legal director of Riverkeeper. I've had quite a lot of involvement in nuclear issues over the years, starting, I think, at Oyster Creek with a relicensing proceeding down there, and then did a few different cases around the country, Florida, one up in Massachusetts. And then when I came to Riverkeeper, I got involved in Indian Point. And I should note, for all those who keep saying, well, you can't understand nuclear power if you're not a scientist, luckily I do have a degree in physics, so sometimes that helps.
Thank you very much. It will come in handy. So Dave Lockbaum, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Dave Lockbaum. I retired a couple of years ago after 40 years working in the nuclear power industry, roughly 17 years in the industry at plants, including Fitzpatrick and Indian Point, and also worked at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And in somewhere brief sandwiched between those, I worked for a year for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as a reactor technology instructor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Next slide, please. So we're just very fortunate to have such a diverse group representing all of the agencies that have any role to play in oversight and to help the communities transition post-closure, as well as Dave and Richard. We really welcome your participation and support here. All of the local governments, the host communities, you're essential to this work, and of course our representatives from labor who represent employees at the plant. They do incredibly important work, dangerous work, and the work that they do is keeping the overall community safe. And it's going to be important as we go forward as a Decommissioning Oversight Board to also not lose sight of the need to protect worker safety as well. So I think we've got the right group to attack an agenda like this. As you can see, it's a packed agenda. We're going to try to move quickly through it. Again, we want to reserve time at the end for the public participation. So next slide, please. We're going to begin with some task force business. Next slide, please. A few updates to provide for task force on key milestones and issues that we track and business that we have to do pursuant to the statute. So first and foremost, the most important activity that has occurred since we last met is the fact that Unit 3 has now shut down. and the PSC proceeding reviewing the transfer of Indian Point from Entergy to Holtec has been resolved with an approval subject to a number of conditions that were identified by the active parties in the case as necessary for approval, including just a few worth mentioning here. The need to maintain a minimum balance in the decommissioning trust fund for 10 years of minimum balance of $400 million, maintaining a minimum balance of $360 million of the trust fund until partial site release. Holtec is required to return 50% of recovered DOE money for spent fuel management to the trust fund. There's a site restoration and remediation consent order with the Department of Environmental Conservation. The company is funding emergency management and response activities at the state and local level. There will be necessary financial and project reporting to New York State, which will be an important part of the information we all review as an oversight board. And of course, cooperation with the relevant regulatory agencies in the Decommissioning Oversight Board. Notably, following the approval of the PSC, subject to these conditions, the transfer closed on May 28th. Next slide, please. The other very important item that we track as a task force, of course, is the cessation fund. This is the program administered by ESD that provides financial assistance to taxing jurisdictions that are affected by the closure of power plants. And over the course of the last several months, a number of important things have transpired related to the cessation program. Notably, back in February, the Public Service Commission approved a funding mechanism that secured $12.5 million annually through 2030 to be put into the fund for the purpose of the program. This was, as many of you know, a big concern by the taxing jurisdictions that while the program was in place and that was good, it was always subject to available funding. So for them to be able to budget out a number of years was difficult, and to have this dedicated funding mechanism in place gives certainty to the taxing jurisdictions that this program will be there to assist them. So following the PSC action, the legislature and the governor enacted some changes to the statute in the budget, increasing the authorization to the $140 million, extending the sunset of the law to ensure that the full 7 years of eligibility for the Indian Point communities will be there. And now we're seeing the program actually working with the first application coming through with the Village of Buchanan. So I think in summary, I can report the cessation program is in strong financial shape and is working as it was intended. But we, as a task force, will continue to keep an eye on this, and we'll want to hear from the taxing jurisdictions whether there are any issues whatsoever in the application process. Next slide. The other bit of business for the task force, under the statute, we are required to submit an annual report updating the governor and the legislature on activities for the year. We will be, I say we, Tom Kaczmarek, our executive director, will be sending all of the task force members a draft annual report no later than the end of this week. We'll ask for any feedback, and then Tom will transmit the report on our behalf in early July. The highlights that you'll see in the draft report that you'll receive in the next couple of days include things that won't be a surprise to any of you. Just walking through the PSC approval and the bullets I just highlighted in the previous slide, cessation program status. Notable legislation was enacted over the last year. Thank you to the leadership of Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Galiff. A number of bills passed and were signed by the governor that really helped to strengthen the workforce, helped to confirm PSC's authority jurisdictionally over the retired nuclear power plant. It addresses the assessment of the spent fuel pools and dry cask storage systems so that there could be potential future revenue streams for tax base. And also importantly allowed the pilot agreement to be entered into even though it was a deactivated nuclear power facility. So really important legislative activity that was, I think, very helpful to the community and to the employees. We'll also report, as we always do each year, on the Department of Labor's activities in providing workforce training information and job placement support for affected employees. And we'll provide a summary of plant operations, notably the ceased operations April 30 and the removal of all nuclear fuel from the IP3 reactor in May. So I'm going to pause here and ask if there are any questions from the task force members on recent activities and the business that we have as a task force to submit the annual report. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Tom?
Yes, go ahead.
Alan Smith here. Yeah, I just had, for one point of clarification, and I apologize if you covered this, but going back to the previous slide with respect to the funding that's being made available to essentially to the municipalities at this point.
Yes.
And you had noted that obviously the Village of Buchanan, first in line, are the ones hardest hit. In terms of the actual monies or the dollars that are being allocated, was that 12.5 million? Is that an annual amount, or is that? Oh, that's an annual amount. And can you just maybe break that down just a little bit more in terms of, to the extent that you can? Is that money that's going? I mean, not the is that entire amount allocated for a specific municipality, or is that just, how is that being made available and to whom?
Okay, so previous budget appropriations established the fund in the first instance, and prior to having a stable recurring annual funding mechanism, we used to track sort of the balance of the fund. And there were some one-time appropriations that were added over the previous few years. We realized as both a task force and I think as the legislature and Division of Budget and others, that the sort of piecemeal one shots were not really providing the sufficient certainty for the long-term duration of the program. So it was recommended by the task force that a stable funding mechanism be identified. The State Energy Planning Board agreed with that concept of providing that stable funding, and they actually amended the state energy plan, which gave the PSC the legal authority to establish a collection through the utilities to establish a funding mechanism that is provided directly to ESD, so that they have the funding necessary to pay out the grants to eligible communities when they become eligible. So the authorization for 140 million that was provided in the state budget this year is the authorization on the total expenditure under the program at ESD based on the known eligible communities that will be applying for the funds over the foreseeable future. So that is the total kind of exposure, if you will, on the fund that is known to us today. And the 12.5 million annually was what was identified as needed to get to that amount over the period of time that communities will be paid out. And so the last point I'll make is the reason the village is in first is that the communities become eligible in their fiscal year, the first fiscal year during which they experience a 20% or more reduction in the revenues from the plant. And so based on the way the fiscal years work, the village's fiscal year came first and they became eligible first. But the school district and the town and the county will also be eligible when their fiscal year hits and their loss hits the right milestone.
Thank you.
Sure. And Vince from ESD, if I got any of that at all wrong, please correct the record now.
No, you got it right, Tom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Vince, for working with the village on their application. Okay, any other task force business?
Hey, Tom, it's Tom Carey. How you doing tonight?
Good, thank you.
Good. I just wanted to get a little clarification. I know last time we spoke, there was a couple of different trades that had national agreements with Holtec, and that's not the case for all the building trades. So I don't know if Brother Al Libertor or Bill Smith could help me out on this one, but we did reach out on a few different occasions to Holtec in regards to getting all the building trades a meeting with Ed Doyle, president of the Westchester Putnam Building and Construction Trades. And I don't know if that's happened yet. I tried reaching out to Eddie, so I just want that in the minutes.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom, to that point, if I can, when we met with Holtec in our office, we reiterated that point. They said they were going to be reaching out to all of the locals, not just the ones they had national agreements with. And I believe the only one they reached out to you was you, Tom. And the last time I spoke with them was on the local task force meeting, and they still hadn't made those outreaches yet, but they said they would. So we can follow up with them, but you raise an important issue. We want those agreements to go forward.
Tom and Senator, we have been in talks with technically CDI, who is Holtec. We just wrapped up the security officers, and we've been in talks with them about our construction agreement. So they've been pretty good so far, but we just started talks with them.
Okay.
Good news.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Al, because yeah, like I said, I haven't spoke with Ed Doyle, but you know, I know the last we spoke, I did receive that phone call because of your phone call to Holtec, Senator. So thank you very much. And Al, I'll give you a call tomorrow on the.
Yeah, and Tom, I did leave that part out, but that is part of it. Is I believe what Janet Tosh was going to come meet with the building trades.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for raising that. Chair Howard, I know that you played a very big role as chair of the PSC in overseeing the proceeding that got us to this point of the transfer to Holtec, and wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that process.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to everybody on this call. Almost all of them I know personally. So my history, it turns out, with IP goes back literally 30 years from when I worked with the New York Power Authority, and then stretched through my time when the New York State Assembly, when I worked with then Chairman Tonko and then with Chairman Brodsky upon the sale of the plants from Con Ed and the Power Authority to then NJN. And then now at the PSC. When I first got into the PSC, I told Chairman Rhodes this was my #1 priority issue when I came to the commission. And as a matter of fact, within the first month, I visited the site and we had an extensive tour. Was briefed on the Holtec energy plant. Right after that, I did a fair amount of outreach to people in the community and asked what their opinions were. They're always the same, but they did have, it was great to hear their views. I was probably the #1 skeptic on this particular project from the beginning. To get me to where I am now took a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I give everybody who was involved in this settlement, all the participants, a great deal of credit to getting to where we are today. This, what I believe, is an outstanding agreement, certainly in comparison to where we started this process. Is it perfect? No. But is it a lot better than we started with? You betcha. And this tonight is a pretty good indication of what we need to do going forward. And again, I do credit all the signers of this agreement and the people that want willing to work on this body. So I'm just going to end with a brief paraphrase of Churchill. You know, in terms of decommissioning Indian Point, tonight's not the end of the beginning. In fact, it just probably is the beginning of the end. So here we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Howard. And I believe we may have been joined by a few more task force members and Decommissioning Oversight Board members. Is Town Supervisor Puglisi on the line? Can the moderator unmute?
Supervisor Puglisi, you should be unmuted at this time. You may have to unmute on your end.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Supervisor. Welcome.
Oh, great. I've been on from the beginning. I've been trying to get your attention. Okay.
Okay.
Just quickly, first of all, glad to be a member of the Oversight Board with my good partner, Mayor Teresa Knickerbocker, host of Indian Point. Okay. Tom, could you please restate for me the 12.5 million? That's per year, and for how many years, please?
That is per year through 2030. And that
okay,
is meant
didn't catch that number.
Yeah, and that is meant to provide sufficient revenue cumulatively in addition to the legislative appropriations to get to approximately 140 million, which was the calculated amount that is necessary to meet all of the fund's known obligations, including to the Indian Point communities.
And how many other communities in New York State, as we speak, are drawing down on the cessation fund, please?
I'm going to defer to Vincent to confirm that there are no new entries into the program. But Vincent, can you confirm?
Yeah, I believe there are 6 at the moment. There are 5 that have been in the program for approximately 5 years. And one very recent entry, Tom, that you may not be aware of, related to the closure of the Cayuga facility.
Okay, so it's not, you know, I just want everybody to understand it's not just us. There's other communities that will be tapping into this fund. That's important for everybody to know. Tom, just on some logistics, how often will this oversight board meet, please?
Pursuant to the bylaws, which we will get into that later in the agenda, Supervisor, but it will be at least 3 times per year.
All right, and you're taking minutes, and if you are, can we all get copies of the minutes via email or whatever?
Yes, we have a court reporter taking minutes, and they will be posted online, as will video archive. So long as we're able to technologically do the video, we will provide video for every meeting as well.
Okay, and the list of the participants, also the members, would be very important in their titles, if you don't mind.
That's all in the bylaws. It will be in the minutes, and it is in this presentation as well.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Okay, you bet. Thank you. Any other task force business before we move on to the Decommissioning Oversight Board portion of the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we will move to the next slide, please. So by way of introduction, I want to just say, you know, in December 2020, the governor directed the Department of Public Service to establish this board as part of his approval message of important legislation we referred to earlier that Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Galiff sponsored. And the governor noted, the need for a decommissioning oversight board to provide a venue for all the relevant agencies, local governments, labor, to engage with the local community and to ensure the safe decommissioning of Indian Point. Next slide, please. So, I'm sorry, next slide. The first order of business for the Decommissioning Oversight Board, and I note we do have a quorum present, is to understand the bylaws and adopt those bylaws. And so just to provide an overview, you all did receive a copy along with your request to serve, but I'm going to ask our counsel, John Sipos, to just give an overview of the bylaws, and then we'll move for a vote. John?
Thanks, Tom. And if I trail off or you can't hear me, just wave and I'll try to get closer to the microphone. So as Tom said, I think all the members of the Oversight Board here tonight have received copies of the proposed bylaws, and we appreciate the feedback that have been provided by some of you regarding the draft. The bylaws are meant to guide the Decommissioning Oversight Board activities and level set our expectations going forward. And I will note just a few important aspects for salient purposes as we present them for formal vote of the board. First of all, this is an advisory body only. There is no new legal authority granted to this body pertaining to the enforcement or regulatory control of decommissioning or site restoration activities. That said, however, there are several members on the board, including the Department of Public Service and the Department of Environmental Conservation, that do have pre-existing statutory and regulatory oversight and investigation and enforcement jurisdiction. Secondly, the members of the board are laid out in the bylaws to Supervisor Puglisi's question, and I believe all are present today. The bylaws also do allow for the appointment of staff, which will be supported by the member state agencies. Fourth, the bylaws do state the intention of having at least 3 meetings per year, with the majority of members representing a quorum. And if there are recommendations that the board wishes to make to the jurisdictional entities or to Holtec, the board can vote to direct staff to effectuate such recommendations with a majority vote. A couple other details as well. Meetings will be public, and there will be minutes and video archives that will be posted for public viewing. Members of the board may, from time to time, need to review information that may be confidential, and if such information is shared with the board, members agree to protect the confidentiality of such information. And winding up, the bylaws also include a prohibition on conflicts of interest. No board member may have a financial relationship with Holtec or its affiliates. And I'll just note that it appears for purposes of good order that we do have a quorum here. So with that, Tom, back to you.
Thank you very much, John. Before I call for a vote, does anyone have any questions or comments about the bylaws?
I do, Tom. Sandy Galiff, I just wonder, do we have to fill out a disclosure form of any sort?
John Sipos, I'll defer to you as counsel.
I believe we do. Board members do not, but I will verify that, and we will communicate that out to all the board members.
And to clarify, Assemblywoman Galiff, are you referring to the financial disclosure that's required for public officers by JCOB?
That would be one thing, but the other would be just a conflict of interest form that you, I mean, the bylaws say you can't have a conflict, but I know on other boards I've had to write down whether, you know, I have any relationship with any business or whatever doing business. So I just wondered if we needed to do something formally.
Well, we can take that under advisement. We are not subject to the public officers law for purposes of financial disclosure that we're aware of for JCOPE that you and I have to do as public officers. This is an advisory body only, not subject to the public officers law. But your point is well taken regarding the conflict of interest portion of the bylaws. And so why don't we ask John Sipos as counsel to take that under advisement as to whether there needs to be a form committing to or agreeing that there is no conflict that members are asked to sign.
Right. We will certainly do that and get a response out in the near future, quickly.
And we appreciated your advice on the amendment to have video archive. Is there any other questions or comment on the bylaws? So with that, I'd like to move to a vote. All those in favor of adopting the bylaws, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Any opposed? Okay, hearing no opposition and having a quorum, I will note the bylaws have been adopted unanimously. Thank you. I also want to note that under the bylaws, it is noted that we can designate staff members, and in anticipation of the bylaws being adopted, I did ask Tom Kazmarek to serve as executive director of the Decommissioning Oversight Board and John Sipos to serve as counsel. We do not anticipate the need for a secretary at this time, as we plan to use a court reporter service to record the minutes of each meeting, and we thank them for being on for today's meeting. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move into a few presentations related to the Decommissioning Oversight Board, and I thought it would be helpful to really set a foundation for the work that we will all be doing together. I've asked Dave Lochbaum to provide an overview of radiation monitoring and control at nuclear power plants and decommissioning sites. And I've asked John Sipos to give a presentation on the agencies involved in oversight of the decommissioning process, because there are many federal, state, and local agencies who have a role and play a role. And I thought that then from those presentations, you know, we could have a discussion around how all of that will fold into the work of the Decommissioning Oversight Board. And then lastly, I've asked Karen Gentili from the Federal Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration to give a presentation on the Enbridge pipeline, given the strong interest in the community and concerns about the co-location of the pipeline and the nuclear facilities. And then we'll have an open discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave Lochbaum. Dave?
Thank you and good evening. I appreciate this opportunity to provide basic information on the monitoring, controls, and reporting required for radioactive materials at Indian Point. Slide 2, please. I will present some very basic information about radioactive materials. I will then cover the various pathways taken by radioactive materials being discharged to the air and water and the associated controls over those releases. Finally, I will compare the amounts of radioactive materials and their radiation doses to workers and the public during both reactor operation and during decommissioning. Slide 3, please. Very basic. Atoms consist of negatively charged electrons spinning around positively charged protons and neutrons which have no charge. Slide 4, please. Radioactive materials contain unstable atoms that emit radioactivity as they try to become stable. Slide 5, please. There are two forms of radioactive materials at a nuclear plant. The primary forms are fission products and activation products. Slide 6, please. Atoms fission or split into two smaller atoms. Some of the fission products are unstable. Some of them are stable, but many are unstable. Slide 7, please. Certain uranium and plutonium atoms become unstable after absorbing a neutron and split into two fission products. The splitting atoms also release neutrons that can sustain the nuclear chain reaction that drives the reactor. Slide 8, please. Stable, non-radioactive atoms that get hit by radioactive emissions from their neighbors can become unstable themselves and thus become activated. Those are activation products. Slide 9, please. Tritium is a good example of an activation product. Boron is dissolved into the water flowing through the reactor vessel in the spent fuel pool to help control the nuclear chain reaction. A boron atom absorbing a neutron can form tritium in either a liquid or gaseous state. Slide 10, please. Depending on conditions, radioactive materials exist in liquid, gaseous, or solid forms. They also can change form, such as when tritiated water evaporates to become gaseous tritium. Contamination occurs when radioactive materials get into places they should not be. Slide 11, please. There are four common types of radioactive emissions that unstable atoms will pursue to become stable. Alpha particles are helium atoms without their electrons. They're relatively big and slow on an atomic scale, making them easier to stop. Beta particles are electrons without protons and neutrons. They're smaller and faster than alpha particles, making them a little more difficult to stop. Slide 12, please. Gamma rays are photons with about the same energy level as beta particles, but a little bit tougher to stop. Finally, neutrons are about the same size as electrons, but they typically have much higher energy levels, making it a little bit more challenging and difficult to stop them. Slide 13, please. Not all unstable atoms march to the same drummer, even those that emit the same type of radioactivity seeking stability. Half-life is a term used to define how long it takes for half of the unstable atoms of a specific type or isotopes to decay. Slide 14, please. When all fuel rods are intact within an operating reactor, water flowing through the core picks up some fission products. Tiny holes and cracks in the fuel rods allow even more radioactive gases and particles to enter that water. Slide 15, please. In addition, dissolved substances like boron and particles in the water flowing through the core can become activated along that journey. Slide 16, please. Water flowing throughout the plant can leak out during maintenance and tests, get past degraded gaskets and seals, and emit radioactivity that activates nearby components and structures. Slide 17, please. To the extent possible, water is processed for reuse in the plant. Storage tanks, such as those shown in this map of the plant sites, and filter demineralizer units collect and handle that radioactive liquid. Slide 18, please. When water cannot be reused, it can be discharged to the Hudson River. It is routed into the flow of non-radioactive cooling water being returned to the river to dilute its concentration. That's shown by the little yellow band on the map. Slide 19, please. Before being discharged, the contents of a tank are sampled to verify its radioactivity levels are low enough to permit its release. During the actual discharge, a radiation detector confirms the release is permissible or sounds an alarm to have the outflow stop. Slide 20, please. Due to past leaks and spills of radioactively contaminated water at the site, numerous monitoring wells have been installed to track what's going where underground. Federal regulations do not allow unmonitored and controlled releases, so the monitoring wells are essentially a compensatory or remedial action. Slide 21, please. Pathways through which radioactivity in gaseous form reach the environment are monitored and controlled, similar to the process used for liquid releases. Slide 22, please. Some tanks collect radioactive gases. Their contents are sampled before being discharged. Radioactive detectors in exhaust ducts and vent stacks monitor the flow and sound alarms when high readings warrant halting the release. Slide 23, please. Plant owners are required to submit annual reports to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on the releases of radioactive materials to the air and water. NRC inspectors will audit the monitoring and reporting efforts at the site. The annual reports are available online with the link to the annual report form from this information was extracted at the bottom of this slide. Slide 24, please. Federal regulations also require the owners to calculate the radiation dose to members of the public from the radioactive materials released during the prior year. In this case, as in most cases, the calculated dose was far below the federal limit. The federal limits were shown by the upper purple line arrow, and the actual releases in 2019 are shown by our doses are shown by the purple arrow pointing to the lower purple arrow. Slide 25, please. To check against either unmonitored releases or monitor releases that unexpectedly gang up that pose greater harm than anticipated, federal regulations also require radiation monitoring at off-site locations, with the results also reported to the NRC annually. Slide 26, please. The radiation doses measured at the off-site locations around Indian Point for the past decade have been about the same as background radiation levels detected at a control location. Slide 27, please. As Tom mentioned earlier, all the spent fuel assemblies at Indian Point have been transferred from the reactor vessels into spent fuel pools within the adjacent fuel storage buildings. Slide 28, please. The spent fuel assemblies continue to emit radiation as their unstable atoms emit radiation. The water circulating through the spent fuel pool must be cooled to prevent the spent fuel from overheating. That water also carries away fission products and activation products, as did the water flowing through the reactor core. Slide 29, please. The rate of radioactive emissions is far lower during decommissioning than during reactor operation, and the amount of radioactive water being circulated, stored, and processed is also much lower, implying that the releases of radioactive materials to the air and water and the associated radiation doses will also be lower. Fortunately, data exists to back up this theory. Slide 30, please. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission prepared this generic environmental impact statement for the decommissioning process generically. Slide 31, please. As part of this effort, the agency reported the annual releases of radioactivity to the air and water from operating plants and from reactors being decommissioned. Slide 32, please. This table is the same data on the previous slide, just in an easier format for me to understand. The data show that the amounts of radioactive liquids and gases released during decommissioning to be less than the amounts released during operation, as expected. Slide 33, please. The data further show that the radiation dose to workers during decommissioning to be less than the worker dose during operation, also as expected. Slide 34, please. The federal limits on monitoring, control, and reporting of radioactivity released to the air and water during decommissioning remain the same as those in place during plant operation. While the amounts of radioactive materials are lower, as is the hazard they represent, workers and the public have the same protective shields in place. During decommissioning, the margins to those limits simply increase. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'd like to open it up to the group if there are any clarifying questions about the presentation, and we'll have an open discussion at the end as well. But I just, for any immediate questions from the presentation, any questions?
David, what should we be looking for then? You're saying decommissioning, you have less of an impact on everybody, but what are the problems that could result during that period of time of decommissioning until all of the spent fuel is out of the pools?
From past experience, for example, the Fort St. Vrain nuclear plant in Colorado, was it being decommissioned? As workers cut up pipes and cut through or demolished concrete, some of the radioactive materials that had been embedded in the piping and the concrete were released. And the primary hazard were to the workers themselves. They breathed in some of these radioactive particles. We've learned from that. And today, a lot of those same activities are done with the materials underwater or in positive ventilation ducting, so that any particles go into the filters instead of into the workers' lungs. Those radioactive particles that aren't breathed in by workers could also migrate off-site and get into affect members of the public. But the amount of material is so much lower. Hazard isn't zero. That's why the limits remain in place. And you can't let down your guard just because the hazard is diminished, because if it gets to places it shouldn't be, problems can develop.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Dave, I have a quick question for you. I know this is Richard. How you doing? Thanks for the presentation. I know you had a slide on monitoring there, and I've had some questions asked about the school have monitors on them or close to them. Do you happen to know that?
My understanding is that they do not currently have monitors at the schools. There are monitors that would detect radiation blowing in that direction if the wind happened to be blowing in that direction, but those monitors aren't currently at the schools themselves, is my understanding.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, because we have heard from Joe Hochreiter expressing some concerns about one of the schools in the district that is located closest to the plant, and has reached out to us to discuss the possibility of figuring out a way to do real-time monitoring at the school. Joe, did you want to discuss that now?
Yes, if we could, that is
Sure.
exactly a concern that we've heard, and that is the district we have. That this is new to all of us, the whole process of decommissioning and physically taking down the concrete domes, and there has been an interest to learn more about that part of the process, which, as we understand, will begin in the year 2024. But a way that our closest elementary school, and perhaps others, and I'll loop in the mayor to see if it's possible for some monitors to be in municipal facilities as well, so we can get some real-time data, so we can respond if we receive information that we're not expecting, or information that that needs an immediate response, whether it's for safety of students or direct communication line to Holtec. So if that could be a short and long-term goal of this body's work, or perhaps pointing us in the right direction, we certainly, more information and more timely information is something we certainly would support during this process.
Thanks, Joe. And because Joe reached out to us, we have asked staff to research the technology available and the various approaches that have been used in other locations. And that work is ongoing. And I would propose that our staff at the Department of Public Service, Dave Lockbaum is a tremendous resource who has helped us think about this, and any of the other oversight board members who wish to be a part of some discussions that we could have ongoing, after this meeting and between this meeting and the next. Hopefully we can propose some solutions to address this concern.
Tom, will you please include me in that subgroup?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Hi, Tom. It's Teresa.
Tom.
I'd like to be included in that. And Joe, I know there's been ongoing discussions with the monitoring at the school, but I don't know if Dave knows how many monitors are in the area of Indian Point. Would you happen to know that, or would you know where they are? Or
Perhaps we could go back a few slides that show the map.
yeah, well, they was kind of small, even with my glasses on.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay, so all right. And where are there any? I know there's one fairly close to the school on Westchester Avenue, but we'd have to look at where these are placed also in comparison to the school.
Yeah, and I think it'll be good also as part of our work group as we look at this to understand sort of what's required under the regulations and under the PSC order versus sort of what the community may want as extra protection or best practice to address the school community's concerns. And so we want to take all of that under advisement and consideration. Now, the monitors that are here are required under NRC regulations and are required to remain in place throughout the transfer of the spent fuel from the pools into dry cask storage. And once the spent fuel is in the dry cask storage and on the pad, these off-site monitors are no longer required. And I want to pause there to make sure I didn't get any of that wrong. John Sipos or Dave Lochbaum, is that, please confirm that's your understanding as well.
This is Dave Lochbaum. That is my understanding. I want to touch on one further point about the number of existing monitors. There's a time delay. Those get sampled and reported on an annual basis, where there are some monitors that do real-time continuous monitoring that you can look at online and get a more immediate sense of what is or is not happening where. So that's another factor with existing monitors. They're not quite as timely as perhaps the need arises.
Hey, Tom and David, I have a quick question, actually. This is my colleague, Catherine Borgia, who was unable to get onto the panel, but has been watching as an attendee this time. But she did text me. She wanted to follow up on, and I join her in this question, to follow up on the Superintendent Hochreiter's question, discussion about the school, or comments about the school district. And is there a way that we, that Holtec will they be shutting down the pipeline in situations or under circumstances in which they'll be, working, on or near the pipeline?
So I can take that initially, and there will be a longer presentation later on the agenda with pipeline safety staff to discuss further. But the short answer is it depends. There's what we have asked as a Department of Public Service, playing our oversight role, both of gas safety and of the decommissioning facilities, is that there be strong communication between the decommissioning outfit, Holtec, and the owner of the pipeline, Enbridge, and establish those lines of communication. We have already done that. The sale closed only a few weeks ago, but we've immediately ensured that the right people from Holtec can pick up the phone and get the right people at Enbridge to coordinate activities and to understand the significance of activities so as to make decisions about any operational changes. But I can't say definitively that any decisions have been made as to whether or not there would be a necessity to shut down pipeline operations. Of course, there are customers on the other end of the pipeline that depend on the energy over the pipeline. There could be actual public safety risks on the other end of the pipeline that all of us should care about. And so we need to factor all of that in. Of course, we're going to insist on the strongest safety protections possible. And that starts with very strong communication lines so that everybody knows what each other are doing. Any John Sipos or anyone else want to add to that?
Yes, Tom. Hi, Representative Smith and Representative Borgia. Yes, and in fact, that is addressed in the joint proposal as well as the Commission's order. There is very clear lines of authority, lines of communication between Holtec and the DPS staff, and as there has to be advanced planning, advanced discussion about activities that could have an incursion in that area. And I mean, I think we'll be hearing more about that later in the presentation. But there is, DPS is aware of that concern, and is taking steps proactively to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And kudos to Legislator Borgia for finding a way to still participate. And I want to say I'm sorry for the technical difficulties with WebEx.
Legislator Borgia always finds a way.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dave, for really thorough and concise explanation of some complicated points. So thank you. Could we spin through the slides? Thank you to regulatory agencies. I'm now going to turn it over to John Sipos, again, laying some foundation for the Decommissioning Oversight Board, give an overview of the regulatory agency. So John, take it away.
Thank you. And again, signal if you can't hear me. We thought it would be actually helpful to talk about the various agencies. It may seem to some folks that it's almost like a bit of alphabet soup, lots of consonants, and not always clear what's going on. But I think for folks who have been at the Decommissioning Task Force over the last 4 years and have been following the Indian Point facility and activities at the site, over many years, some of these will be more familiar. First of all, of course, we have the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They regulate the radiological safety of nuclear power reactors. And in the realm of decommissioning, NRC regulations establish minimum financial assurance requirements that all nuclear facility owners must satisfy and comply with those requirements for decommissioning activities. The regulations also provide that NRC approves the plant owner's decommissioning and license termination plans. So when folks hear about partial site release, that is what is involved in that concept. Before those actions can commence or go final. And also during the decommissioning phase, owners must submit annual reports regarding decommissioning status to the NRC. And I'd also note that in the realm of decommissioning, funding aspects were initially involved and depended upon public utility commissions around the country, not unlike the New York State Public Service Commission. So there is a cooperative federalism aspect in that realm as well. We also have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. FERC regulates the interstate transmission of electricity and natural gas, including the transmission and sale of natural gas for resale in interstate commerce. FERC reviewed and authorized the siting and construction of a segment of the Algonquin pipeline system near Indian Point, known as the Algonquin Incremental Market, or AIM, segment. A predecessor federal agency approved the earlier constructed Algonquin pipelines that crossed the Indian Point site, and that approval was back in the early 1950s and mid-1960s. There is also two other federal agencies, as you can see on the slide: the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, known by its acronym PHMSA, which is part of the United States Department of Transportation. It establishes and enforces safety standards for, among other things, natural gas pipelines, like the Algonquin pipelines, that are at or near the Indian Point site. And as Tom noted, we are fortunate that Karen Gentili from PHMSA will be speaking with us a short while later. Last, amongst the federal family of agencies, there is the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, or OSHA. OSHA regulates the health and safety of nuclear facility workers to the extent that the workplace conditions are not otherwise regulated by the NRC. And as between the NRC and OSHA, the NRC typically has the lead for radiological conditions, chemical conditions related or produced by radiation, and facility conditions resulting in the potential increased risk of radiation exposure to workers. On the other hand, OSHA has the lead for facility conditions that cause occupational hazards not related to radiation. So one might think of toxicity materials that are not related to radiation. There is a memorandum of understanding back in 2013 between OSHA and the NRC, which envisions a cooperative interagency approach to minimize regulatory gap, of course, with the goal of advancing worker protection. So I'm going to turn now to the local and state agencies that will be that we have discussed or may have a role during the next phase of work at the plant. There is the New York State Public Service Commission. We've been joined tonight by Chair Howard and, of course, Tom Congdon, and the New York State Department of Public Service. And under the Public Service Law, the Commission possesses general supervisory powers over electric plants in the state of New York, which include retired nuclear power reactors and their associated systems, structures, fuel and waste storage facilities, and fixtures and personal property. The PSC also regulates utility rates in New York, and that authority has included and does include rate authority over nuclear decommissioning costs. The trust funds that we have discussed and that were referenced in the joint proposal and the Commission's order were initially and previously capitalized by Commission-approved expenses, as well as payments and collections from the New York Power Authority. Also, DPS supports inspection of interstate transmission pipelines, and PSC also has independent litigation authority. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the New York State Department of Health will be playing a key role in the decommissioning and site restoration aspects. DEC is the agency that is charged with protecting the state's natural resources and abating pollution. And as such, DEC has jurisdiction over various non-radiological environmental hazards at Indian Point, but notably also with respect to radioactivity that falls below 25 millirem per year, that also remains subject to DEC jurisdiction. So DEC has substantial regulatory authority in this area, both non-radiological and with respect to residual radiation as well. And DEC has entered into an administrative consent order with Holtec that requires Holtec to undertake a comprehensive site investigation, characterization, remediation, and restoration activities at Indian Point. The Department of Health supports DEC on environmental radiation matters under its jurisdiction, especially as they relate to public health. The New York State Department of Labor has a role to play as the site transitions to decommissioning. The New York State Department of Labor can assist in reviewing and coordinating issues concerning worker safety and health, as well as issues raised by organized labor and also public employee safety health concerns. The New York State Department of State has a role including the development of the Coastal Management Plan and administering the Coastal Zone Management Act. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, serves as the coordinator amongst New York State agencies on atomic energy issues, and its president and CEO is the state liaison officer to the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And Elise Peterson, who is joining us tonight, is the designee state liaison officer. NYSERDA also has Title II and leases an outfall structure to the owner of Indian Point, which is now Holtec. The Westchester County and the New York State Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services play crucial roles in emergency planning, DISHES coordinates the state's efforts to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from both human-made and natural disasters, threats, fires, and other emergencies. And with respect to Indian Point, the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services has authority over, among other things, emergency response drills, site security plans, public alert systems, and on-site fire suppression programs. Westchester County has its Department of Emergency Services, which also has emergency preparedness responsibilities for the Indian Point site. And of course, the Village of Buchanan, the Town of Cortland, and the County of Westchester, who are the local host communities, among other responsibilities, have first responder, public safety personnel and resources, and are the first line, boots on the ground resources protecting the community. So that is a quick tour through the various local, municipal, state, and federal agencies. That's what I have for now. Back to you, Tom, and any questions there may be.
Thank you, John. If we could go to the next slide, please. So hearing from Dave on some of the scientific and technical background and from John on the regulatory oversight, I think, as a decommissioning oversight board, it's going to be critical to have an understanding of both the sort of technical aspects of decommissioning as well as the regulatory aspects. If we are going to be effective, we have to know how to interpret data, and we have to know where are the relevant agencies to direct attention to any given concern that we may have as an oversight board. And I just wanted to sort of have a wrap-up discussion of sort of how I'm seeing the value add that the oversight board can really bring. As John just laid out, there are a large number of federal, state, and local agencies involved in some way or another with oversight. And I think without an oversight board, all of those relevant entities may be off doing their own thing in their silos, and it would be difficult for anybody, certainly, a member of the public who isn't, paid to do this kind of work, to keep track of it all. And so, number one, value add from the oversight board is to be a venue for tracking all of that work. We will have the ability to be a convener of the relevant oversight agencies, a convener of the companies involved in the work, and a convener for public discussion and community leaders. We will be able to look at the company compliance reports that must be filed. We will be able to get updates from the relevant agencies on the oversight work that they are doing. To that end, I'll just highlight from the DPS point of view some of the things that we will be doing. We will have a monitor that will be able to go on site. We already have staff with access to the site, a nuclear engineer on our team who can perform inspections to ensure compliance with the PSC orders. We also want to highlight the importance of, whistleblower protection. Sometimes the most important information we can get is going to be from the employees themselves. And we want the employees to know that this oversight board takes worker safety very important. As Dave Lockman pointed out in his presentation, some of the more dangerous exposures are really to the workers themselves, and they are doing very dangerous work, and it's work that's protecting the broader community, and we owe it to them to ensure the highest level of workforce protections. And so to that end, we have established at the DPS a dedicated email and phone hotline that employees can use to report any concerns they're seeing from inside the operation. And we'll be monitoring that and addressing any issues that arise. And again, following up on that, we have the representatives from the major unions that are doing the work and who are on site actually here on this oversight board. And so they're going to be a key player. And I'd ask them to think about topics for discussion at future meetings, and we'll work with you to develop some ideas on that front. As Dave mentioned, there is data, a lot of data that's publicly available from the offsite monitoring equipment. There's a time delay in that, and I think, you know, many of us are observing that after the fuel gets on the pad and those offsite monitors are no longer required to be present, that there will likely be a need for continued monitoring of some kind, especially at sensitive locations like the school. And so we're going to be looking at how to do that so that we will have data to use as an oversight board, so that if we see something, then we can start to investigate with the appropriate jurisdictional entities what might be causing that kind of concern and address it. And last but not least, and perhaps most important, this oversight board is a venue for the community engagement. The people who live in the community have lived in the community with an operating nuclear power plant for a long time. It's a very educated community. They understand, you know, what goes on at a nuclear power plant, but there's never been a decommissioning before in this community. And I think there's understandable concerns that we want to try to learn about by engaging with the community and making sure that there is opportunity at each of these meetings to hear from the community what those concerns are. We may not have answers to those concerns in real time, but that input will be very valuable for us to then take back, do necessary research, and be able to be responsive to the community when they bring issues to our attention. I know we're getting a lot of questions already in the chat. We're going to be reviewing those and trying to get to them. Some I think have already been answered, but we can also just take all of that in. We'll research as a group and either be back to individuals between meetings to share responses or to discuss them as a body at our next meeting. So I want everyone to know the chat function is not wasted. We're taking notes and keeping track of that. So I'm going to pause here and invite reactions from the oversight board about John's and my summary there.
Hey, Tom.
Hi, legislators.
Colin.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make a quick comment. I'll be brief. I know lots of people probably want to speak, and we have a number of folks asking questions in the chat. I'm sure there's a few more out there as well. First of all, thank you and your colleagues for putting together a very comprehensive primer and first meeting. Thank you for the invitation as well to be a part of this task force. I think we're off to a good start. And, as you stated, there's a lot of ground to cover moving forward, but I think we've gotten off to a good start here today. I just want to make not a pitch really, but just, you know, in order to in the spirit of sort of staying in one's lane. There's so many layers to you know, just nuclear power in general, but now that we're at the decommissioning phase, putting this as this kind of like, I don't want to say it's the old saying of building, you know, building a plane in the air or whatever that saying is. There's a lot that we are still trying to learn as we're moving forward. But from a public safety standpoint, that's the committee I chair at the Board of Legislators, and I know that Susan Spear, who is one of our deputies of the Department of Emergency Services here at the county, Commissioner Richard Wishney, who I don't know if he's actually on this evening, but obviously, as you stated there towards the end, John, when you were talking about the different agencies, you know, the overlapping functions, the county as well as the town, you know, the town and village, you know, first responders are really that front line of, you know, defense in the event of an emergency. And, you know, thankfully, fingers crossed, we haven't had to off that bridge, but the possibility is always there. And I think, given, just sort of the nature of any potential emergency situation, to the extent that it's not been addressed, it hasn't been addressed to the extent that it hasn't, yet been addressed in this process, I would want to certainly make sure that we keep it as a focus of making sure that our, first responders, our emergency services are bolstered and fully supported, and have adequate resources to be able to meet any potential emergency challenge that may result, because under these circumstances, one is too many. So that's just kind of my pitch from the public safety standpoint. I will now continue to listen, and again, thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you very much. I think Senator Harcum had his hands up. Senator Harcum, and then Supervisor Puglisi.
Thank you very much, Tom. I just want to agree with Colin. Terrific job. You and your colleagues have really pulled this together in short order, but done a tremendous job. Just want to make a pitch for all of the agencies on the prior slide. Little background: when Assemblywoman Galiff and I first looked at this legislation, we were anticipating a civilian oversight board. And the reason we didn't go with that is a civilian board couldn't have boots on the ground. And all of the agencies that you listed with jurisdiction have boots on the ground. So I think it's incredibly important that they continue to have boots on the ground. We encourage them to have boots on the ground, and that there is a robust discussion about what they're finding, pro and con, while they are on the ground, because that's the advantage of having all these folks engaged with the task force. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator. Completely agree with that. And I want to go back to Legislator Smith for a moment before we get to Supervisor Puglisi. John Sipos, can you remind the group, there was, I believe, in a FERC rate case, some monies made available to Verplank for emergency response. Do you want to?
Yes, I will briefly summarize that. I believe it was back in 2020 that as a result of the Department of Public Services participation in a regulatory proceeding that was before FERC, that our colleagues were able to negotiate an agreement whereby the regulated entity agreed to provide some financial support for the Verplank fire program. And over 2 years, I think there were 2 separate payments. And so certainly we here at the Public Service Commission and DPS have in mind your comments about supporting local resources. And to my knowledge, that was the first time that a state had made such a request and had advocated on behalf of a local first response fire department, and it was successful. So that's I think we mentioned that in last year's report, but your comments brought that back to mind. So I just wanted to get that out there, that DPS has been working to support the local resources.
And I want to also plug the importance of emergency drills and working with the local emergency planners. Our Division of Homeland Security and other state agencies can be available to help discuss plans for doing emergency drills so that there's the highest level of preparation as well. I want to turn it to Supervisor Puglisi.
Thank you so much, Tom. As you know, the mayor, the superintendent, and myself for 4+ years now have been involved in various levels of task force ever since the announcement of the closure of Indian Point. And also prior to that, for 30 years now, I've been involved in NRC, Entergy, Power Authority, Con Edison, forums, public hearings, asking hardball questions, monitoring the situation for 30 years. And I will not stop, even when I'm not supervisor. I will as a private citizen. I'm retiring in 6.5 months. And I just want to get these points across because there's only going to be a minimum of 3 times a year that this advisory board meets. So just give me a moment. I would appreciate it, please, Tom.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I want to get back to the local frontline people, being the wonderful people that live in the village and in the town and are participants in the school district, fire district, et cetera. We're here on the ground. It was mentioned by Colin and by others. And I just want all of our issues to be heard. This is an advisory board. It's made up of all of the excellent agencies in New York State. I don't want anybody to take offense to anything that I'm saying. We appreciate you working with us for the many years, and we'll continue to do so. I know you will as partners. But I want to get back to the school issue. I get a lot of emails. I know the superintendent gets a lot more than I do, but this Buchanan Verplanck Elementary School and the close proximity to the pipeline, I believe it's about 500 feet, that is a critical issue that has to be at the top of the priority list. It has to be monitored, evaluated, addressed constantly. I want to just drive that point home, if I may. And then I also heard that the monitors, once the rods are in the units, the dry cast storage units, they're going to be deactivated, I think I heard. I would be totally against that. Why in the world would we ever deactivate them? Keep them going. What is the harm of keeping them going? God forbid there's some leaking or whatever. You want them there. You want them there. And there's 33 plus wells on the 240 acres. I've said it a million times. I have that number ingrained in my head. And I want those wells monitored. I want reports. I just don't want, you know, the niceties of HOTEC and the NRC communicating, talking to each other. Okay, that's lovely. I want hardball evaluation studies. I want reports. I want the locals to get those reports, everybody on this board to evaluate them, and I think that should be at the top of the list of priorities. There's nothing more important. So those are my thoughts. I will put more of my thoughts in writing to you, Tom, and you can disseminate them for me. I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Any other questions on the decommissioning oversight presentations? Oh, welcome, Legislator Borgia. Hi.
Here I am in person. Sorry about the technical difficulties, and I apologize in advance because I was off the line for about 10 minutes trying to figure out a better technological solution. But so I want to echo some of the things that I know that my colleagues have raised. I think it is very important to look at any impact that's going to happen with the school, that especially the school that is right on site, that are very close by. I want to know if the decommissioning oversight board is only going to meet 3 times a year. What opportunities to address issues with parties in between meetings? What's the level of responsiveness we can expect from, for example, state agencies, which I'm less worried about, versus HOTEC versus the NRC or any federal agencies if something comes up. And I'd also really, although I want to emphasize many financial and safety issues that have already been raised, I also want to say that I am really hoping that we're going to find a way to hear from the public on a regular basis. And if our board, since our board does not have any regulatory, one thing we do have though is the bully pulpit where we can really start talking about these issues. I think for all of us who've been sort of involved in this idea of how decommissioning is going to happen for a number of years, and we've heard from a lot of other communities that have had decommissioning happen. And one of the things that happens is now the reactors are shut down, people, it's less front of mind for people, and every year it becomes less of a priority in terms of safety monitoring and oversight for the regulatory agencies. But yet we still live here. We still live here. There might be accidents. There might be something that is going wrong mechanically. And we want to be able to have a strong voice that says, not just for the immediate short term when things are moving and when there's going to be, when the buildings are being dismantled, but over the long term to ensure that the safety is always paramount in the minds of the people who are responsible for keeping us safe. So I want there to be more public opportunity for public input. I will say I will take responsibility for some of the technical problems. We do have some issues with our county laptops, but it was very frustrating, and I represent people very close to Indian Point, and I myself live very close to Indian Point, to not be able to jump on this discussion easily as a panelist. So I was not able to do my duty as an elected representative, but that also makes me scared about making sure that the public voices are heard, that anything that anybody from the public sees or witnesses, or if there's something that happens that impacts the nearby school, that gets to the right people fast. So that's
all very, very good points, and I want to respond to a few of them. First of all, the bylaws stating a minimum number of 3 meetings is really just to establish the floor, and I anticipate more frequent meetings than 3 a year, especially in these early years. And we can call a meeting at any time as the conditions warrant. And so to the extent that any of the oversight board members are concerned about a particular issue you want to pull together, I would encourage you to call me and we can arrange for it. I'll also, apologize for the technology. I think all of us over the past year and a half have sort of gotten used to these virtual meetings, but there still remains from time to time some technical glitches. And I'm pleased to see the vaccination rate is very high in New York, and the state of emergency announced by the governor today is coming to an end. So I think that the possibility for in-person meetings going forward is much higher than it was, and so perhaps we will be able to get together, and maybe it will be a combination of in-person and virtual, since we can take advantage of some of the technology. Your point.
I just want to say, just to that point, and I take responsibility for my technology issues. I'm just saying we need a responsive mechanism, whatever that is. Right. It's not so much about the technology, it's about the speed. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes. And, we have on our website an ability for the public to enter comments and observations and concerns at any time. And we did receive some comments before this meeting. There's a chat function that's open for the public to ask questions. We're going to document all that. We're planning to have a public statement session for each of the Decommissioning Oversight Board meetings. And I think the community engagement piece, I agree with you, is very, very important. I want to also, address that from the earlier meetings, and, the local task forces, I think have also provided another venue. And we've, as a state, participated in the local task force meetings. And we've heard during those meetings and observed the chats to understand the sense from the community of the things that are on their mind, the concerns that are on their mind right now. And that's why we've already been engaged with Joe Hochreiter on the school issue. We recognize that that's something where we can provide a value add, and we have been doing a lot of research to assist in presenting some opportunities for addressing the concern of the need for monitoring at the school. So we hope to have more to say about that in the coming weeks. I think, Catherine, I'm not sure if you were on for that portion of the discussion with Joe, but we agreed to set up a working group to get together offline and research options further that we can help assist the school district in that regard. And then last but not least, and this could be a segue, unless there are more questions about the Oversight Board activities, we have another presenter. Mayor, do you have a
Yes,
question?
I'd just like to say something.
Sure.
I think it needs to really be understood from the beginning. The mantra has been the safe decommissioning of Indian Point and also the restoration of the property. So that continues. It continues with the school. Of course, there's concerns with the school. We want to make sure the children are safe. But remember, the Village of Buchanan is a 1.3 square mile community. So, you know, we have to be concerned and monitor things within the village, which is right there. So I just want to make that understood. We're all concerned about these things. It's about the safety and of the residents and the children. So I agree with my colleagues, Joe Hochreiter, Linda Puglisi, who have been wonderful partners since the beginning of this. I couldn't have asked for better partners. And also all the agencies and everyone we've worked with since the announcement. I do want to make one comment because I see this in the chat. Entergy and the Verplank Fire Department had an outstanding working relationship. So just for clarification, the Verplank Fire Department, even though it's in the Village of Buchanan, is that was their fire district, and it had been that even before Indian Point was purchased. So that's why you know, the funding. But what I would like to see, and I know, Tom, you have commented about that with the pipeline, I would like to see more training with that. And we did have an initial training once the pipeline was put in, but also let's remember a large portion and a pigging station is within the Village of Buchanan, within the Village of Buchanan's fire department district, Buchanan Engine. So I think a combined drill or training with Verplank, Montrose, Buchanan, and if anyone from the Peekskill district would like to be part of that. But you know, Buchanan is also going to be a first responder. So I just want to keep that in mind if anyone needs to become available. Thank you.
Really good point. And that's a good segue to our next presentation. If you could go to the next slide, please. Karen Gentili from the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration is with us today. I also want to just acknowledge a number of the comments that have been made by the board members expressing concerns about the co-location of the Enbridge pipelines in the vicinity of the Indian Point site. And, you know, as a decommissioning oversight board, I think one of our roles will be to ensure that there is a spotlight put on the co-location so that all of the relevant entities are called on to discuss the issues with us on a regular basis. And the pipeline operators understand the concerns in the community and of course, Holtec. And so I think that this will be a recurring agenda item, updates on, you know, pipeline activities, if any, and updates, you know, on any pipeline safety oversight. So I'm very grateful to Karen for joining us this evening. She's an incredibly busy person, and she fit this presentation in on short notice. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you for a presentation on the Enbridge pipelines.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everybody. Again, I'm Karen Gentili, and I'm a community liaison with the United States Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, commonly referred to as PHMSA. I support PHMSA's Office of Pipeline Safety in the Eastern region, which basically covers the northeast corner of the United States, from Maine down to Virginia and over to West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Ohio. I'd just like to thank the Indian Point Decommissioning Oversight Board for inviting me to participate this evening. I'll be talking about each of these items that we have up on this slide. For those of you who might not be familiar with PHMSA, PHMSA is the federal agency responsible for setting and enforcing regulations and standards for the design, construction, operation, maintenance, and abandonment of pipelines. And our primary focus is on safety. We work closely with state pipeline safety programs to include the New York State Department of Public Services Pipeline Safety Program to carry out our mission and our responsibilities. The New York State Pipeline Safety Program is an interstate agent for PHMSA. This means that they have authority and responsibility to inspect interstate pipeline facilities in New York, to include all the Algonquin interstate natural gas transmission pipeline facilities, to check that operators are complying with the minimum federal pipeline safety standards. If they identify compliance concerns with the regulations, state personnel provide information on the concerns along with evidence of noncompliance to PHMSA so that we can take enforcement action. PHMSA is very familiar with the pipeline that operates near Indian Point Energy Center and the concerns raised as far back as 2013 when Algonquin submitted a pre-filing with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for the Algonquin Incremental Market Project, otherwise known as AIM, to construct the new 42-inch natural gas transmission pipeline near their 3 existing lines, a 30-inch, a 26-inch, and a 24-inch line. The Algonquin pipelines that operate in New York, to include those near the Indian Point Energy Center, are required to follow the federal pipeline safety regulations that are contained in Title 49 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 190 through 199. Part 192 is the section that specifically focuses on the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of natural gas pipelines. Included in these regulations are integrity management requirements, and those are in Part 192, Subpart O. These integrity management requirements require that pipeline operators that operate pipelines located in high consequence areas, such as in an area where there's a greater concentration of buildings intended for human occupancy, or places where people gather, have to have integrity management programs. As part of these integrity management programs, an operator must perform assessments on their pipeline facilities to include performing assessments to check for features in pipeline. These things could consist of dents, corrosion, or coating defects. If the features meet certain criteria, as prescribed in the safety regulations, an operator may be required to take pressure reduction or act to repair the condition within a prescribed period of time. I know there's a lot of particular interest in the pipeline work that's being done in the vicinity of Indian Point. From June through August of this year, Algonquin plans to excavate near the Indian Point Energy Center property to inspect features that they discover during an integrity assessment and perform preventative maintenance on their 26-inch pipeline, which is located near Broadway Road in Buchanan, New York. Work on these features is scheduled to begin on or about June 28th and last for approximately 6 to 8 weeks. It's important to note, though, that the features that Algonquin has identified do not meet an actionable level as defined in the pipeline safety regulations that would require them to either take a pressure reduction or for that repair to be made within a specified period of time. The features that were identified are referred to in our regulations as monitored conditions. What this means is that the regulations specify that the operator doesn't have to schedule remediation of the features that are considered monitor conditions. But what they must do is they must record and monitor the conditions during subsequent risk assessments and integrity assessments for any changes that might require remediation. So again, while the features discovered on the Algonquin line don't require action at this time, Algonquin plans to take action to repair these features sooner as opposed to later. Algonquin also has some additional work planned where they'd like to connect their 24-inch auxiliary pipeline near the Hudson River to the 26-inch pipeline that traverses Indian Point. This work would take place within the Indian Point boundary. Algonquin has received approval from the operator of the Indian Point Energy Facility to conduct test pits digs near the river crossings to support this 24-inch, 26-inch connectivity effort. These test pit digs are required to gather information on the subsurface soils and the bedrock, which are necessary to apply for the stormwater management permits required for the actual construction work. These are the stormwater pollution protection plan permits. The test pit digs are scheduled to be completed in the late June, July timeframe using vacuum excavation techniques. The actual 24, 26-inch tie-in work will not likely start before November, however. Again, the work that's being done now is those test pit digs for their permit applications, but the actual start of the work is not anticipated to start before November, but may be deferred to later. Algonquin has been providing updates on their planned work to the New York Department of Public Services Pipeline Safety Program. Algonquin and Indian Point have confirmed, and the New York State Pipeline Safety Program, that they each are aware of the work that's going on and with each other's facilities. They've spoken and they've coordinated, and they don't have issues with the work that's taking place on the pipeline facilities or for the decommissioning activities. So there's that communication chain that was discussed, which is so important, is taking place, and the New York Pipeline Safety Program is continuing to monitor that communication. While PHMSA has regulatory requirements that operators must follow to include requirements for making repairs on actionable features within the prescribed timeframes, PHMSA has no role in approving pipeline projects to include maintenance activities, piping configuration changes, or operational changes. It's the pipeline operator's responsibility to work with the appropriate federal, state, and local agencies, along with the landowners, to get any required permits and approvals necessary to perform those projects. And again, any projects, whether it be construction, changes in their pipeline facilities, or maintenance work, has to be done in compliance with the federal pipeline safety regulations. So PHMSA will continue to work with the New York State Pipeline Safety Program, Kevin and his inspection team, to oversee pipelines in New York to ensure that operators are meeting or exceeding the federal pipeline safety regulations. If inspectors find safety issues or problems related to noncompliance, PHMSA will issue compliance actions to achieve and maintain pipeline safety and to ensure regulatory compliance. I hope this information is helpful, and you're welcome to contact me anytime if you have any questions.
Karen, thank you very much. I'll just take note of the time. It's 8:30. We do have about 12 or 13 speakers registered who wish to make statements. But I'm if the board is okay with going a little beyond 9 o'clock so that we can be sure to get to all of the registered speakers, I would then invite some questions, if any, for Karen. But we should try to.
I have a quick question, if I may.
Sure. Senator?
Yeah,
Go
thank
ahead.
you very much. Karen, thank you. This was very educational. I appreciate your making time to join us. One of the concerns that I hear from the community quite a bit has to do with the 3-minute shutdown time period. If there's an incident, a break, a fire, God forbid, something worse, and the ability to remotely shut down the pipeline in 3 minutes. And what has been seen nationally in other incidences and audits have shown that it can't be done in 3 minutes. That's a great concern of many folks in the community. Can you address that, whether I was accurate in my assessments and what your position is on that, and what's being done to address the speed of a shutdown in the case of an emergency?
Sure. I'll try to do my best to address your question. I know that there were some studies done a few years ago to look at things like potential impact radius of the pipeline facilities, shutdown times to isolate the pipeline facilities. However, it's been some time and I can't confirm, what the time was, but, that's something that we can look into. I know that there was, again, a study that was done that, looked specifically at some of those topics.
Yeah,
so
if you could look into that and report back, that'd be very helpful.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. And I think, Senator, as you know, we reported earlier meetings that our gas safety team conducted an audit at the control room to test the timing of a remote operated valve closure. And we did confirm it would be in excess of the 3 minutes. That being said, we shared those results with the entities that had done those studies to assess the risk of what damage would occur at the plants. They did respond to indicate from the federal perspective that it didn't change their risk assessment, but it was important for us to have done that audit of the time it would take to do the remote operating valve. Is there anything the gas safety team from DPS would like to add? I think we've given you panelist treatment. Kevin or Arpit? Did I cover that accurately with respect to my summary of your audit?
Yeah, that is correct. We did the audit. There's the technical capability to close that valve very quickly from the time they press the, they send the signal to close it. However, we felt that there would likely be some time needed to get confirmation that there was a rupture or an event on the pipeline, and that would likely take I think it was about 7 to 8 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. But when they did when they updated, or when they did the study a couple of years ago, that they did take that into account, and they were satisfied with that time. But really, the technical feasibility is there to close it very quickly, and again, it's just a matter of having confirmation before they do that.
Thank you. Any other questions for Karen?
Just one other comment. We did hold a meeting with Holtec and Enbridge last week, I believe, and discuss the work that was being done, and we did agree that we would continue meeting on a regular basis, so that if there's any changes in plans or anything, we want to make sure that that communication is taking place. And the good news was that both sides did know prior to that meeting what was happening. So we just were able to confirm that, and the lines of communication between Holtec and Enbridge are open, so that's good.
Thank you.
Tom, can I just add, was there any discussion, or did I miss it, about closing the pipelines when they're working in certain areas through the decommissioning and trucks coming in and so on? Is there an option to close? Are we talking about that at all?
Well, I think in our letter to the federal agencies, we had indicated that as decommissioning gets underway, to ensure that if there is decommissioning activity that is of the intense variety where there's excavation and other heavy equipment, that there may be it may be warranted to change operations or temporarily slow operations or reduce pressure on the line for that work to be conducted during that time. No decisions have been made on that, Assemblywoman, to my knowledge. But what we have ensured is that there's coordination so that the timing of the various work activities is known by both parties, and they can make decisions as to whether or not there needs to be operational changes to ensure safety. But that's something our gas safety team will stay engaged on and monitor, and we'll keep the board apprised of that.
May I just, I'm sorry, just to piggyback off of Sandy's question, because I had, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and for maybe another meeting, you'd mentioned about how, some of there's more than just to consider it when they're considering shutting down pipelines for, like if they're doing construction nearby or something along those lines. Part of the consideration is who's on the other end of those pipelines, other communities or what have you that are receiving the gas and so forth. For me at least, and I don't know if this is maybe doesn't even have to be subject to one of our meetings, but to have an idea of how that where are these other communities, what is how much sort of just maybe the process beyond Buchanan, beyond Indian Point, knowing a little bit more about that process, I think could be, for me at least, and perhaps for some of the other board members, be instructive in terms of how we, shape the conversation moving forward about, I know there's obviously there's a part of the agreement is, in place has to do with Holtec and I believe it's Enbridge, as well as the regulatory agencies being in close contact regarding any type of shutdown that may be required. But be helpful, I think, to know also what are some of the other considerations outside of our area that impact the decision process here.
I think it makes perfect sense, and I think that's an excellent idea for a future presentation to better understand the operations of the pipeline, and to know, just reducing pressure can present risks for the pipeline as well, even locally, not so much necessarily for the end user. If it's done in the kind of the right season of the year when gas demand is low, perhaps it's not an impact at all on end users. But the act of depressurizing and pressurizing a line can present issues as well. And so I think it would be helpful to have some experts give an overview of pipeline operations for this particular pipeline. So thank you for the idea. We'll keep it on the list of future presentations. Okay, so we have about 12 or 13 registered speakers. And if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to skip the open discussion because I think we've had discussion all along the way. And if it's okay with the board members, unless there are other issues that have been raised that you'd like to get to before I start the public statement session, I'd really like to get going to allow the public their chance to provide some input.
Tom, I just have a quickie if I can.
Sure, go ahead.
Which is, there was an incident at Oyster Creek with a dry cask where it was pressurized and the valve blew off and radioactive water was released. I think we want to make sure, there's going to be quite a lot of movement of the fuel into dry casks over the next couple of years. So I'd like to ensure, first of all, that such an incident doesn't recur, and understand what measures Holtec's taken to make sure it doesn't recur. Second of all, it took about, I think, 4 months for that incident to become public. And I'd like some reassurances that if such incident occurred at Indian Point, that it would be promptly notified to the state and to this board. And then I have some broader question on cask, which is cask inspections. Are they adequate? I think they're visual only. And if that's true, I have a concern about backwall corrosion. And then the question is, if the inspection shows there's a problem, what's the contingency plan? So that's sort of by way of saying we should discuss these things at a future meeting.
Thank you, Richard. Noted. I think the dry cask issue, and especially when there are incidents involving Holtec, where there's some safety issues at some of their other sites, I think it will be very important to make sure that lessons were learned and to hear directly from Holtec what remedial actions they've taken so that that lesson is learned and applied at the Indian Point facility. And we will, I think for the next meeting, we should invite Holtec to make a presentation, and we can prepare for some presentations on dry cask methods, technology, et cetera. So thank you for the idea. That's noted. Any other thoughts for future meetings? I think we've taken a number of thoughts during the course of the meeting, so I think we're developing an agenda. But before we go to the public statement session, I want to ask one more time if any other topics should be researched for the subsequent meeting.
I just want to say that Holtec did present at one of my meetings, and we did go over the spent fuel cask. So, you know, I don't know if there'll be more questions with that, but that's fine to review that again. I'm sure people have more questions. The only other last thing I'd like to say, this goes back to the cessation fund, is I'd like to thank Vincent. He was very helpful. He was very responsive with the application process. So shout out to Vincent. Thank you, Vincent. You were great. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor Knickerbocker, and thank you, Vincent. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Tom Kazmarek, who will be the moderator for the public statement session for tonight's meeting. And I'd ask the Oversight Board to bear with us because it looks like we will go a little beyond 9 p.m., but I think it's important that we try to get to all the registered speakers. So Tom.
Thank you so much. We first want to provide an opportunity to make a public statement to those individuals who registered ahead of this meeting. Those individuals will be given the opportunity to speak in the order in which they registered. To provide a fair opportunity for everyone who registered to speak, all those will have a 3-minute time limit. If time allows, which given the late hour, we may not be able to, but if time does allow, members of the public who did not register to make a public comment may be given the opportunity to do so at the end of that session. Any members of the public that are not able to speak this evening will be given other opportunities to make public comment. Those opportunities will be provided on an ensuing slide. Any comments included in the chat and the Q&A, as Tom mentioned earlier, those are being recorded, and the Oversight Board will be looking at all of those questions. Your line will be muted when it is your time to speak. If you are pre-registered and you are joining us over the phone, I ask that you please raise your hand by dialing *3. I will then unmute you to allow you to speak. So the first registrant I have it did register to join over the phone. I believe the name I have here is Rich Mermelstein. If you are joining us today, if you could please raise your hand, either using the digital feature, or if you're joining over the phone, please dial *3. Okay, you've been unmuted. You may need to unmute yourself on your end as well.
Tom, can you go over the instructions for how he unmutes
Yes.
from a phone?
So yes, you should be able, again, you should be able to dial *3. All right, we will work through that technical issue. We'll get to the next individual on the list. We have Dan Galinko. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing these names correctly. Dan, you have been unmuted. Are you with us and able to speak?
I'm with you. Thank you, Tom, and thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to the broader board. It's great to see such a multidisciplinary group pulled together here to look after the public safety and public interest. I guess, well, just introduce, I'm Dan Galinko. I'm been in the district in Cortland Manor for 5 years now. I've got a kindergartner just finishing kindergarten tomorrow and a couple twins that are going to be rising and going into the elementary school system. So very personally concerned with the safety of BV and the other schools that are in proximity. So just generally concerned that certainly 4 months or even a year lag time in terms of whether there's been a radioactive exposure or release from the site that could impact the school 4,000 feet away is horrifying, to be honest. But beyond that, and I put a comment in the chat during the meeting that it's also the activity of demolition that'll kick up dust, asbestos, lead, anything else that's within the site that could be, drift over onto the playground of the facilities of the school, into the ventilation systems of the school that provide a lot of concern. And furthermore, just thinking of the mundane issues beyond the pipeline, I mean, thousands of trucks on the street competing for space on the streets with the school buses. There's just a tremendous amount of issues to be concerned about. And based on what I know today, I find it hard to imagine that I'm going to send my kids over to BV while decommissioning is going on. But, again, I'm looking to this board and to the public interest that you'll be serving to be chasing down these issues and determining real time every day that the school is safe to send kids to. So thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to give Rich Mermelstein one other opportunity. I understand there may have been a signal issue. I'm going to unmute you again, and the only thing you need to do is just make sure that your own phone is unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm obviously not Rich. I was using my husband's phone. I have a comment, a question, and a concern. I'll keep them all short. My comment is I really hope the board is aware that you're not only speaking on behalf of the reactor community here. You are going to be a model for the nation. There are many plants that are involved now and about to embark on decommissioning, and what is done in New York and the level of transparency and accountability and understanding of the process is really, you're paving the way. You're building the airplane in the air. And I really hope you take that as a very solemn duty. So that's the comment. The question is, I'd like to have a better understanding of the mechanism by which members of the public, environmental groups, and civil society groups should interact with the board in order to ask questions and get reasonable questions responded to. That's the question. And the third thing, which is a concern, relates to especially to pregnant women, babies in utero, small children in the region. I've had the dubious pleasure of extensively reviewing emission reports and the well reports that were done at Indian Point, which are a torturous process. But one of the more startling aspects of those reports is you see low level, low level, low level, huge spike, low level, huge spike, then no information, then low level for a while, then huge spike. And certainly for the decommissioning activities, not just with the dismantling of structures, but given the amount of contamination that is in the bedrock and in the buried systems, you are going to have real levels of spiking radioactivity in the near region. And to have members of the public find out about it, even if it's accurately reported, late after it happens is really not acceptable. I would strongly suggest that when there are activities about to be embarked upon that are very likely to have such releases, that members of the public are advised in advance and given the opportunity to shelter, particularly, again, pregnant women, people with babies, people who are nursing, who are all at elevated risk of radioactivity. Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you very much.
Tom, it's Tom Congdon. We're not going to be able to address all the questions, but on a process point that was just raised, how should members of the public engage with the Oversight Board? I just wanted to say that they can engage through numerous channels. We have a website, and Tom will put up a slide at the end of this session that shows where you can go to access all of the documents of the Decommissioning Oversight Board and the task force. And there's a place for public comment there. There will be opportunities at every one of our public meetings for the public to make statements and to ask questions via the chat. We'll try to be responsive during the course of a meeting, but always be responsive by the next meeting, because this is basically the point of the Decommissioning Oversight Board, is to engage with the public. And we appreciate the comments you made there as well, and we'll take all of that under consideration. Tom, back to you.
Thank you, Tom. Next up, we have Courtney Williams. Courtney, you're unmuted.
Yes, thank you very much. I have one question for the PSC, which is that in 2018, New York State put out its own risk assessment of the AIM pipeline at Indian Point, and they listed a slew of unanswered questions, and they specifically said that decommissioning increases the risks of a pipeline rupture. And myself and others have asked this of the PSC in the past and not gotten an answer. Were those unanswered questions at some point answered and we are unaware of that? Or has New York State just stopped caring about the answer to those questions? And what happened then about the increased risk? Is that still a concern? So I would really like to know, or to see a document outlining the answers to the questions that New York State raised in its own risk assessment, and clearly indicating what the answers were and or how those questions or risks were resolved. My other question is related, or is probably for the PHMSA representative, which is that it's well known and established that Algonquin said they could shut off the gas in 3 minutes. That was never questioned by the NRC or FERC. It was taken on face value, despite experts saying it was an impossibility. Now that the PSC has determined that that is actually not true, given that it is the basis and underlying assumption upon which all of the safety mumbo jumbo that has been presented here, what does PHMSA have to say about that in terms of pipeline safety? I would also like to ask that, you know, a lot of this stuff is all facts and evidence. We've been working on this for many years. It would be really great if the folks coming to speak with us were aware of the background and the work that's already been done, so that we could get answers during these meetings as opposed to some later date. And for questions that were asked in the chat, are those going to be, the answers to those going to be provided publicly, or how will we get those answers?
Yes, we'll provide answers to the chat questions publicly, and to these specific questions as well. I will note just on the PSC letter that went to the federal agencies, the issue of decommissioning and risks to the pipeline were related to the statistical analysis and the risk assessment about pipeline ruptures generally across the country, noting that one of the highest risk type of activities that cause pipeline ruptures is excavation. And that's what causes many accidents. And we observed in our letter that given that the decommissioning process itself may involve excavation, that there had to be heightened attention to pipeline safety during decommissioning. And that's something I mentioned earlier in this meeting, and something that we will continue to follow through on. And as to the federal agency answers, I will say they have not been fully responsive. So that's been an ongoing issue, but we will kind of document what we have and provide it to you, Courtney. Thank you. Tom, back to you for the next questions.
Thank you, Tom. Next up, we have Susanna Glidden. Susanna, you've been unmuted. We're going to try that once more. Susanna Glidden, you are now unmuted.
Yes.
If Susanna, sometimes the echo is caused if you have more than one device open for the meeting.
Thank you. Let me close this other one.
Susanna, you should be okay now. I closed it for you.
Thank you so much. It's concerning. You've just confirmed that excavation heightens the risk of a pipeline rupture, and the entire approval of putting in AIM, the high pressure pipeline near Indian Point, was based on a 3-minute ability to close it down should there be a rupture. And yet that has been exploded, that myth. And the damage after a few minutes would be done. The entire site would have exploded, more or less, and the entire region would be affected. And that no decision has been made yet about shutting the pipeline down during excavation is shocking to hear in this presentation. The corrective in any excavation, demolition, or construction job of a building, the first thing that's done is to shut down the gas. The PSC must submit notification to PHMSA to issue a corrective action order to shut down the pipelines at Indian Point before demolition begins, period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Susan Van Dulsen. Susan, you are now unmuted.
Thank you very much. I will not reiterate many of the points that were covered about the pipeline. I do have one question that came up that Tom Congdon is answering Catherine Borges' question. And you said that you're aware of the concerns and you're taking proactive steps about the pipeline. So I'm curious what proactive steps that DPS is taking. I also want to draw attention to a pipeline accident that had occurred in Kentucky. And this one resulted in a 30-foot long piece of pipeline traveling 460 feet from where the rupture occurred, creating a 50-foot long, 30-foot wide, and 13-foot deep crater. And I'm just trying to picture how that would work with all of the radioactive materials sitting there during decommissioning. And I don't know that anyone here, anyone on this panel any of those people in those agencies that you listed have any idea and have ever fully understood or analyzed what a pipeline rupture would do on this particular site. I have no confidence that that's been analyzed properly or following federal regulations. So this is what I'm concerned about. It's been raised in many letters, testimonies, statements by public officials, many of us in the public, and nobody seems to be able to fully answer these questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Catherine Skopik. Catherine, you are unmuted.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to express concerns, for listening, and in advance for putting them into action. My name is Catherine Skopik. I'm chair of Sierra Club New York City Group. According to the World Nuclear Association, in their article, Nuclear Radiation and Health Effects, they state, radiation protection standards assume that any dose of radiation, no matter how small, involves a possible risk to human health. The article goes on to explain the unit of measurement used, the gray, that would be capital GY is its symbol, where 1 gray represents the deposition of 1 joule, Joule, of energy per kilogram of tissue. This leads me to the fact that effects of radiation, alpha, beta, gamma, and its health impacts on humans have used 180 to 200-pound white man as the human standard, while it is a well-known scientific fact that children and women are far more vulnerable to the effects of radiation than are men. Therefore, I request that in preparation for the decommissioning of Indian Point, 1, a process of notification is established whereby all segments of Buchanan and neighboring communities are warned well in advance of any blasting, excavation, moving of radiated materials, or any other hazardous procedure. 2, radioactive particles will become airborne during such processes. Children, women, and especially pregnant women, as Michelle also mentioned, need to stay indoors at these times. Therefore, notification at least a week in advance must go to principals of schools, the mayor, appropriate selected officials, health professionals, fire and police department. And I'm going to come back to this, but for additional safety, the AIM pipeline must be shut down. 3, a published document must go to all residents within a 50-mile radius explaining the decommissioning process, its dangers of releasing radiation, ways of protecting oneself, and when dangerous processes will occur. A timeline of planned decommissioning action steps and what people can do to protect themselves. Having friends here and living in New York City, I have concerns for them, us, as well as for the some 20 million New York State residents living within the 50-mile radius of the former Indian Point nuclear power plant and beyond. We need even more community oversight for our health and well-being. And I'm listening to your meeting this evening. I am given some confidence that there are some important questions being asked and addressed. In thinking about the pipeline, I have one question or one word that keeps coming to mind, and that is accountability. The company that built this pipeline was not acting with accountability and even considering putting it near Indian Point. They are accountable. Why should we all be tiptoeing around and making adjustments to our life and having this father being afraid of sending his children to school? Why should we be the ones accommodating when it is the pipeline company who has caused this problem?
Catherine, can you begin wrapping up?
Okay.
We're over time.
Okay, sorry about that. And I realize there are people on the other end of the pipeline that are in need, but since 2013 and prior, there were concerns about this that weren't addressed. And now the issue is becoming even more significant. So I just wanted to express that it's very important, as others have said on this call, that we address the issue of the gas pipeline. And lastly, the last thing I'll say is accidents happen. This pipeline is on 2 fault lines Indian Point is on 2 fault lines. However careful everyone is, however professional everyone is, there are things that cannot be prevented that are out of our control. Please consider this, shut the pipeline down. Thank you. Peace.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Next, we have Tina Volz-Bongar. Hope I'm saying that right. Apologies. You are now unmuted.
Great. Thank you for letting me speak. And there's so many things that have been said tonight that have just personally, really gotten to me and that I wanted to comment on. But I'm going to skip those, and I'm going to ask you the questions that I'm asking myself as a resident who lives under a mile from Indian Point and who sees it every day. And so I want to say this really, about those people on the other side of the other end of the gas pipeline. I think that if they knew what kind of safety and risks that we were living under, I think that they would want to get their electricity some other way, from some other source. And I know that because of over, the 2,000 over 2,000 tons of irradiated fuel rods. I don't want those things shipped to New Mexico, and I don't want it shipped to a state where the governor and everybody else doesn't want it. So with these larger problems, the New York State has really looked at this, and the 4 agencies who are on this oversight board have said about the gas pipeline, there are risks here and we need these answered. And just as Courtney Williams pointed out, these things have not been answered. And it was very upsetting to arrive here and find out about this excavation work that's going on at the pipeline, and it's PHMSA's responsibility on a federal level to educate the community about what they are doing during the beginning of decommissioning. And who is offering oversight? Somebody from DPS? And if you listen to I am just beside myself. I'm beside myself because of the lack of oversight, the lack of accountability. Who's accountable here? Governor Cuomo? Because we need to know that. Like, how can we get our message across that this is too risky? And it's not fair. It is not fair. We are not a public sacrifice zone. And all of this energy and all of this thought has been put into the economics of Indian Point at the sacrificing our public safety. We have one set of directions for an accident at Indian Point for radiation. We have another set of directions for an accident with the gas pipeline. Not one elected official, not one agency has been able to answer the question of what do we do? I have a 98-year-old mother. I need to get her out of here. You want me to go sit on a bench and wait for a bus? I mean, but there's nobody to tell me that. So that's what it's like living here and coming to these meetings and being engaged in these kinds of issues.
Thank you very much for your comments. Marie and Sarah, you will be, can you, if you're joining by phone, can you please raise your hand using *3? All right, not seeing a.
To speak until the host calls on you. Your line has been unmuted. Line has been muted.
Hold on.
Is
this
unmuted? I can't. Has been muted. Your line has been unmuted.
I'm sorry. Is this Marie and Sarah?
Yes, I'm getting a repeat message. It's muted, unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Maria and Sarah. I live in Peekskill. Thank you for the opportunity to submit questions and comments. I would like to just reiterate many of the concerns that have been voiced by those of us who have been involved in the environmental struggle to get the AIM pipeline shut down, to get it not to be opened in the first place. We are angry, we are frustrated, and we are very frightened for what lies ahead of us. I don't think that there's any mystery that the pipeline failure rate in this country has been most prominent in newly constructed pipelines since 1986. The breakdown rate has changed. With that in mind, we know about pipelines. There is no precedent for a pipeline, a live pipeline, never mind 3, on the premises of a nuclear power plant. Since that is the truth, there is no precedent for establishing what the risk could be during decommissioning. We've heard from Mr. Congdon. He's basically capsulized that information for us, yet we have not gotten a response that makes sense to anyone. I heard some concern about what happens if the pipeline is shut down regarding supplies of gas to the population. We know that the basis for this AIM pipeline expansion was really about getting more gas out to the coast to liquefy and to ship overseas. This is really a profit-driven issue. And we've also witnessed some of the shenanigans that have gone on with concerns about gas shortages really designed to jack up prices. We're also looking at the state that has set a precedent for environmental legislation. The CLCPA is talking about getting away from fossil fuels. This could be one easy way to justify doing that, but most importantly, this is about a risk that we can't quantify. And as has been pointed out, evacuation is a myth. If we're talking about those bus stops, then we're kidding ourselves. And add to that the contradictory instructions of what to do in an emergency, we're really in the midst of a perfect storm. We don't want to wait until we're talking about thoughts and prayers. There really won't be many people around to pray if something goes wrong here. And there are lots of possibilities that would indicate, there are lots of indications that things can go wrong. We urge some action on this. We've been trying for years, and we urge some action now before decommissioning starts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Next, we have Amy Rosemarin. You are now unmuted.
Hi, thank you. So I am very disturbed that you are putting our safety in the hands of Holtec and Enbridge to decide what to do about stopping the gas. Why should we trust Holtec and Enbridge to be making a decision regarding the pipeline? They are motivated by money, not our safety. It was just very disturbing to hear that this is you're trying to put it off as like, oh yes, and they'll talk to each other and make sure that things are okay. They are not to be trusted with our safety. I also want to make a point that Indian Point contains a lot of heavily contaminated, highly radioactive, the spent fuel, there's radioactive equipment and infrastructure and soil and groundwater. And during decommissioning, as the spent fuel is being removed from the buildings and the buildings themselves are being dismantled and their contents and infrastructure are being dismantled and removed and are no longer protected by the buildings, an explosion from the pipeline could scatter radioactive debris throughout the site and the region. My question is, why would you even consider taking this risk and not stop the flow of gas during decommissioning? So I would like a detailed explanation. You kind of made reference to the, people who need the gas. I want to see this all laid out, why that is important. There must be other alternatives for them to get their gas. This is just too big of a risk. So And my another question I have that I would like answered is, who is it in New York State who makes the ultimate decision whether to shut off the gas, whether to not give the permits and to order a corrective action order? Who is that person? If it's an individual, who are the people advising that person? There's no reason why this should be a secret. So we would like to know who it is that's making the decision. And I also just would like an answer, I get about why, after knowing that Enbridge couldn't shut the gas off in 3 minutes from notification, let alone 3 minutes from a rupture, and as Karen Gentile from PHMSA should know, that none of the over 900 incidents reported to PHMSA were shut in less than 30 minutes, and most took many hours. So could you please explain why, after knowing that Enbridge couldn't shut the gas, that New York State didn't take steps to shut the gas and contact PHMSA to issue a corrective action order?
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Ellen Weininger. Ellen, you are now unmuted.
Thank you. You can hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I echo the concerns about any question of safety being a top priority, and also this unprecedented decommissioning scenario with pipelines at a nuclear, gas transmission pipelines at a nuclear facility. So first and foremost, it seems to be the most important and the first and most important order of business of this DOB and Public Service Commission to ensure that the gas is shut off at Indian Point before decommissioning, and to take steps to request PHMSA's issuance of a corrective action order. This can't be relied on for using back of the envelope speculations about pipeline rupture scenarios that are endangering millions of New Yorkers. I do want to just provide two brief excerpts from two of the experts who weighed in among many. Dr. Erwin Redlener, former director of National Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia University, said, with the release of their risk analysis and letter to FERC calling for urgent action, New York State agencies confirmed the catastrophic risk posed to millions of lives by the co-location of the high-pressure pipelines at the aging Indian Point. We strongly agree that close proximity to pipelines to critical safety infrastructure and to highly radioactive nuclear fuel stored on site is a persistent and significant threat. This is particularly alarming as we have seen an increase in pipeline failure rates, especially in newly constructed pipelines. To make matters worse, decommissioning and decontamination work anticipated with the closure of Indian Point will certainly involve heavy excavation, which may well further jeopardize pipeline integrity. From a public health point of view, the flow of gas at Indian Point presents an enormous risk to communities and families throughout the region. Shutting down this gas flow should happen immediately in order to avert the possibility of a catastrophic explosion that would have widespread deadly consequences in our region. And another small excerpt from Mr. Rick Kuperwitz, the renowned pipeline forensic expert and president of Accufax. I've reviewed a series of rupture analysis statements concerning the AIM 42-inch transient pipeline rupture near Indian Point. I've come to the conclusion that they do not represent the transient dynamics associated with a 42-inch gas transmission rupture should it fail near Indian Point. Assumptions about closure within 3 minutes to cut off flow near the plant are unrealistic, unscientific. That's already been established. A further recent analysis concluded that a rupture of 1 hour 42-inch pipeline does not impact the nuke plant needs further explanations as it makes
Nancy,
no sense.
we're at time.
Finalize. I'll sum up. Quite simply, agency studies are violating the basic laws of science concerning gas pipeline rupture and associated forces that result in massive cratering, pipe shrapneling, and violate science associated with such releases. It appears that agencies are attempting to dismiss risk as low when gas pipeline rupture may drive a nuke facility to non-safe shutdown in a highly sensitive area. Thank you so much for making safety the single most important priority for this DOB and the Public Service Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Nancy Van. Nancy, you are unmuted.
Hi, thanks, guys. I don't want this to seem like an Academy Awards speech, but first I would like to thank two people in particular, Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Galef, who introduced the legislation to get a decommissioning oversight board initiated for the state. And well, of course, my mother for having had me in the middle of an actual hurricane. But there are a number of things that we need to continue to address, one of which is the fact that the evacuation area when Fukushima accident happened was a 50-mile radius. And there are people within this 50-mile radius that are really going to be impacted by this. The initial legislation called for some citizen participation in the board. I personally live within 1.6 miles of Indian Point, which is closer than most people that live in Cortland. Courtney Williams lives within 1 mile of it, which is even closer than I do. I think that we need to include people from Peekskill, either officials or citizens, and I would like to propose an amendment to the Decommissioning Oversight Board charter to include actual real citizens that have a stake in this. I've also been working with people at the other end of the pipeline. The other end of the pipeline folks do not need this particular gas. The Attorney General for Massachusetts weighed in saying, no, we don't need this gas. There's a compressor station that's being proposed in Weymouth, Massachusetts to send this gas up to Canada, where it's going to be put on ships as liquefied natural gas and sent to Europe. The people there have been opposing this particular Algonquin gas pipeline for several years.
Nancy, begin to wrap up. You're coming to time.
Yeah, I hope that we can actually participate in this. I see that the public statements were all of them after it's now 9:24, and I'd like to think that we are going to have more actual public participation. I appreciate the participation of the state task force. I personally was dragged out of a FERC meeting for supporting Governor Cuomo, who asked for a risk assessment of the pipeline going by Indian Point. You can see videos of that if you're interested, but we need to really focus on what the issues are. This pipeline is incredibly, incredibly dangerous next to this type of structure. The
Nancy, we're over
okay,
time quite a bit.
The OIG, the internal investigation facility at the NRC had many questions about this, and I would like to see those actually answered. And thank you, Tom. I appreciated your work on the state task force, and I hope that we will be able to continue to interact on these issues. But we need to do it.
Nancy, I apologize. We're going to have to move on to allow other speakers to comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder to everyone, there will be other opportunities to comment after this. If you, you'll be able to submit in other ways. So moving on, we have Michelle Lee. Michelle, you are now unmuted.
Hi, yes, I already spoke. I spoke through the Mermelstein phone line. So.
I see. Yes. So we were, I understand. Thank you. So next we have our final registrant is Mana Jo Green. Mana Jo, can you raise your hand if you're joining via phone? And I'll be happy to unmute you. Again, to unmute from the phone, please dial *3. Mana Jo, if you can hear me, again, just dial *3, or you can, if you are connected virtually, please, you can send me a note in the chat. Not seeing a raised hand. Tom, I'll turn it back to you if we see Mana Jo Green's hand go up and show up able to speak. I will let you know.
Thank you, and I'll note that we did receive a lot of written comments from Mana Jo Green yesterday, and so we have that on the record on our website, and we appreciate the input. And want to just say I appreciate all of the feedback from the public. We hear you loud and clear that the co-location of the pipeline is a major concern. We have some homework assignments to attend to respond to some of the questions we heard, provide updates on the communications we've had with the federal agencies, and clarify any of the key points. This will be an ongoing issue that we recognize more information on this is better. And there was an earlier recommendation for a future presentation on the operations of the pipeline. I want to just clarify, because it came up a number of times in the comments, that I by no means would ever suggest that the end users safety should come before the local communities. I merely was pointing out that there is risk to public health and safety associated with the entire length of the pipeline. And those risks may be infinitesimally small, they may be significant. What we can do always is identify opportunities to reduce that risk. And that's been some of the activities that our DPS safety team has undergone, and we'll do more to provide a more thorough presentation at the next meeting on these issues. With that, Tom, is there another subsequent couple of slides here to wrap up to remind the public on opportunities for public comment? Can we go to the next slides? Can you walk folks through this? Yeah. So Our website is www.dps.ny.gov. You can click on the Indian Point Closure Task Force and Decommissioning Oversight Board and click post comments. A number of you have already found this tool, and we will review everything that comes in through that venue. All of the materials from this meeting will also be posted at this site, and the minutes, when they're sent to us, will be posted as well. I want to thank all of the board members and the task force members and the public for participation today. Tom, do you have the next slide? That wraps up our presentation and our meetings. We will schedule the next meeting of the task force and the oversight board in the coming months. And as we indicated earlier, there will be a number of side meetings to follow up on some of the issues so we can be responsive even between meetings. So again, thank you all. These meetings are adjourned.